Liam woke up to the sound of the old clock ticking in the corner of his small room. It was early, the sky still dark with hints of the rising sun on the horizon. He sighed, stretching his arms above his head. The day was beginning, and with it, his usual responsibilities. At 13, Liam already carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Living with his single mother, Clara, and his little sister, Sophie, wasn't easy. Their small house was tucked away in a neighborhood where hope seemed like a distant concept. The streets were narrow, lined with houses that looked as though they hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in years. It was a hard place to grow up in, but Liam made do. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, he would grab his bicycle, load it with the day's newspapers, and set off on his route. Each pedal was a reminder of his duty. The money he earned was crucial. It wasn't much, but it helped cover the bills, buy food, and make sure Sophie had what she needed. This morning felt like every other. The air was crisp, the sky a pale blue, and the road stretched ahead, dusty and uneven. Liam's thoughts were consumed with the deliveries ahead. His mother had been worrying about money again, and he couldn't afford to waste a minute. But just as he was about to turn onto his usual street, something caught his eye. Up ahead, in a small yard, an old man was struggling with a large stack of timber. His back was hunched painfully, his legs trembling under the weight of the planks. Liam's heart sank. The man, Mr. Duncan, was a neighbor who lived alone. He had seen the elderly man many times, but today, the sight of him struggling to lift the wood felt different. The man's face was twisted with strain, his knees buckling under the pressure. Liam hesitated for a moment. He had a long day ahead of him, deliveries to make, money to earn. Every minute spent helping someone else meant less time for his work, and that meant his mother would be short of money for another day. But as Liam watched Mr. Duncan struggle, something inside him shifted. He could tell the old man wasn't going to make it on his own. He could feel the weight of his own worries, but knew deep down that this was one moment when he couldn't turn away. Liam gritted his teeth and turned his bicycle toward the man's yard. "Dang it," he muttered under his breath, pushing his bike toward the fence. As he neared, he called out, "Hey, Mr. Duncan, do you need a hand?" The old man looked up, startled. His face was creased with exhaustion, and his eyes were tired from years of hard living. At first, he didn't respond, blinking as though unsure of what he was hearing. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Boy, I could use some help. These old bones aren't what they used to be." Without a word, Liam dismounted his bike and walked over to the pile of timber. He grabbed one end of a plank, feeling the rough texture under his fingers. It was heavier than it looked, and as soon as he lifted it, he could feel the strain in his arms. The weight was unforgiving, but he pushed through it. "Lift with your knees," Liam said, remembering the advice his mother had given him when he worked in the garden. He adjusted his grip, pulling with all his strength. Together, he and Mr. Duncan hoisted the plank up, inch by inch, until it rested against the half-built wall. The old man exhaled with relief, wiping his brow. "You're a strong kid," he said, giving Liam a faint smile. "Not many people would stop to help like you did." Liam shrugged, feeling awkward at the praise. "It's no big deal. You looked like you were about to drop the whole pile," he said, trying to brush it off. Mr. Duncan chuckled, but it was a weak, tired laugh. His body seemed to be giving out on him. He pointed to a few more planks lying in the yard. "Think you could help me with the rest?" Liam glanced at the sun climbing higher in the sky. He still had deliveries to make, and every minute mattered. But when he looked back at Mr. Duncan's pleading eyes, he knew he couldn't walk away. He sighed and nodded. "Sure, let's get it done." The next few minutes were spent lifting and stacking planks, each piece heavier than the last. Liam's arms began to ache, but he ignored the burn, focusing on the task at hand. They worked in silence, the only sound the shuffle of their feet in the dust and the creak of the wood as they lifted it into place. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last plank was moved. The old man leaned back, exhausted but grateful. "You've no idea how much I needed that, boy," Mr. Duncan said, wiping his brow. "Thank you." Liam smiled, trying to hide the exhaustion creeping into his body. "Glad I could help." He turned to head back to his bicycle, ready to finish his deliveries and make up for the time he'd lost. But before he could pedal away, Mr. Duncan called out to him again. "Wait, boy." His voice was hoarse, and Liam paused, turning back to face him. "You didn't tell me your name." Liam hesitated for a second. He wasn't used to sharing his name with strangers. "It's Liam," he said finally. "Well, Liam," the old man said with a gentle smile, "thank you. My name's Duncan. If you ever need anything, don't be shy. Just ask." Liam nodded awkwardly. "Sure thing. Take care, Mr. Duncan." He hopped back on his bike, his muscles aching but his heart feeling lighter than it had all day. As he pedaled away, he couldn't help but smile. It had been a small act, but it felt good to help someone in need, even when it wasn't convenient. It wasn't the kind of thing he expected a reward for, but somehow, it seemed like the right thing to do. The sun was high by the time he finished his deliveries, and his stomach rumbled as he parked his bike outside the small house. He could smell beans cooking in the kitchen, and the familiar warmth of home greeted him. His mother, Clara, was humming softly as she stirred a pot on the stove. When she looked up, she raised an eyebrow. "You're late today. Everything all right?" Liam nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, Ma. Everything's fine." But deep down, he felt that something had shifted. Helping Mr. Duncan had felt like the right thing to do, and even though it had cost him time, it had made the day feel a little different. He couldn't know it yet, but this simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. The next morning, Liam woke with a sense of normalcy. The sun was still low in the sky, and the cool air of the early hours filled the room through the cracked window. The routine felt familiar, almost comforting. The familiar weight of his paper stack on his bicycle rack and the familiar streets stretched before him, as though nothing had changed. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him since he helped Mr. Duncan. As he pedaled through the winding roads, the sound of the newspapers rustling in the basket seemed to be the only noise in the quiet morning. Liam tried not to think about the man or the small conversation they'd had after the last plank was moved. It wasn't much, but there was something in Mr. Duncan's voice, a certain gratitude that stuck with him. The idea that a simple gesture could have such a deep effect on someone else lingered in his mind. Liam's thoughts drifted back to the house, where his mother, Clara, was likely preparing breakfast. She always woke up early, her hands busy with whatever task needed doing. And Sophie, his little sister, was probably still asleep, curled up in her tiny bed, oblivious to the world outside. But that day, as Liam neared the end of his route, something unexpected caught his attention. A sleek black limousine had come to a stop at the curb in front of his small house. Liam's heart skipped a beat. The neighborhood was not exactly one that saw luxury cars. Most of the vehicles that passed by were old trucks or bicycles, the kind of vehicles people relied on when money was tight. But this was different. The limo stood out like a sore thumb, its polished surface gleaming in the morning sunlight, contrasting sharply with the dull, weathered homes surrounding it. Liam's mind raced. Who could it be? Why was a limousine stopping here? It didn't make sense. His hand tightened around the handlebars of his bike, slowing as he approached. As he got closer, the door of the limo opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and well-dressed, his suit immaculate, as though he'd just stepped out of a business meeting. The man's eyes, sharp and confident, scanned the street before resting on Liam. "Liam?" The man's voice was deep, calm. "I'm Daniel. I work with Mr. Duncan." The mention of Mr. Duncan caught Liam off guard. His eyes widened slightly, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of the situation. "I'm Daniel," the man repeated, giving him a polite nod. "Mr. Duncan wanted me to find you. He has something to offer you, something he believes you've earned." Liam froze, uncertainty clouding his mind. What did this mean? How could Mr. Duncan have anything to offer him? He had only helped the man lift a few pieces of wood. It wasn't something that deserved a reward. Daniel stepped closer, sensing Liam's hesitation. "You helped him when no one else would. And he's not one to forget acts of kindness. Mr. Duncan believes in rewarding people who do the right thing. You've got potential, Liam, and he wants to offer you an opportunity." Liam swallowed hard, trying to process what Daniel was saying. Was this some sort of joke? He glanced at the limo again, its shiny black exterior almost mocking the small, run-down houses surrounding it. It felt like a world apart from his own. He had no idea what kind of opportunity this could be, or why Mr. Duncan thought he deserved it. Daniel seemed to read Liam's thoughts. It's real. It's a job, Liam. Mr. Duncan runs a successful company, and he's willing to bring you on as an apprentice. It's not just about working for him. It's about learning, growing. You could change your life. Liam shook his head slowly. I don't know, his voice trailed off. This wasn't his world. How could he possibly fit into something so different from his daily grind of newspapers and small, hard-earned wages? Daniel smiled, sensing Liam's doubt. You won't know until you try. Mr. Duncan is a man of integrity. If he says you have potential, he's not wrong. Liam stood there, caught between uncertainty and hope. This was the kind of opportunity he had never dreamed of. A job, a chance to work for someone like Mr. Duncan, someone who seemed to have everything. But it wasn't just about the job itself. It was about a chance to break free from the chains that kept him and his family stuck in the same cycle of poverty. You have to decide, Liam, Daniel said, breaking the silence. But don't wait too long. Mr. Duncan doesn't like to be kept waiting. Liam hesitated. His mother, Clara, was going to be the biggest obstacle in this decision. She was protective of him, and with good reason. The world wasn't kind to people like them, and trusting someone like Mr. Duncan, someone wealthy, someone powerful, felt risky. But at the same time, it felt like something worth considering. What does this all mean? Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why me? Daniel looked him straight in the eye. Because you showed kindness when you didn't have to. Because you didn't turn away. Mr. Duncan believes in people who do the right thing, even when it's hard. And he believes you have something special. Don't let that pass you by. Liam stood there, the weight of Daniel's words settling on his shoulders. His mother's voice echoed in his head, warning him about trusting people he didn't know. But something about Daniel's calm demeanor, the certainty in his voice, made him think this might be real. Maybe this was a chance to build a better future, not just for him, but for Clara and Sophie too. Okay, Liam said, his voice firm with a resolve he hadn't expected to feel. I'll do it. Daniel nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. Good. I'll take you to Mr. Duncan's office. We'll start tomorrow. As Liam watched the limousine pull away, a mix of excitement and fear swirled inside him. He had just made a decision that would change everything. That night, as he sat at the dinner table with Clara and Sophie, Liam couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous anticipation. His mother looked at him, studying his expression, sensing something was different. What happened today, Liam? She asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. Liam hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain the strange turn his life had taken. I met a man. His name's Daniel. He works with Mr. Duncan. Clara raised an eyebrow, her expression wary. And Liam paused before answering, feeling the weight of the decision on his chest. Mr. Duncan wants to offer me a job. An opportunity. He says I have potential. He wants me to work for him. Clara's face softened, but Liam could see the hesitation in her eyes. Liam, I don't know. It's not that I don't trust you, but we don't know these people. You have to be careful. Liam nodded. I know, Ma, but it feels like it's a real chance. Something could change. Clara sighed, running her hands through her hair. I just don't want you to get hurt, Liam. You're still so young. The world can be cruel. I'll be careful, Ma. I promise, Liam said, trying to reassure her. But inside, he knew the decision was made. There was no turning back now. The next day, Liam stood outside his house, looking at the spot where the limo had once been. He was about to step into a new life, one that could either lift him up or break him down. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready to find out. The morning was colder than usual, the air thick with the promise of a new chapter in Liam's life. He hadn't slept much the night before, his mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. The decision to take the job offer wasn't an easy one, but as the sun began to rise and he prepared for the day ahead, the excitement slowly replaced the anxiety. Today, everything could change. Liam made his way downstairs, the familiar creak of the wooden steps under his feet. The smell of eggs and fresh bread filled the house, and he smiled as he saw his mother, Clara, at the stove, stirring a pot. Sophie was still asleep, her little figure tucked under a blanket on the couch. The house was quiet, peaceful, but Liam could feel the tension hanging in the air. Clara glanced up as Liam entered the kitchen. "You're up early," she said, her voice soft, a mix of curiosity and concern. Her hands moved automatically, preparing breakfast as though the conversation they were about to have was already written in the air. Liam shifted nervously from one foot to the other. He didn't know how to explain the whirlwind of emotions that had hit him in the past 24 hours. "Yeah, I have to meet Daniel this morning. He's going to take me to Mr. Duncan's office." Clara stopped stirring for a moment and looked at him, her face unreadable. "I still don't know about all this, Liam. You don't know who these people are. I can't shake the feeling that you're walking into something you don't understand." Liam stood still, his hands clenched at his sides. He understood her concerns. She'd always protected him from the world, always kept him close. But something about this felt different. "I know, Ma, but I have to try. I can't keep living like this. You can't keep working yourself to the bone for nothing. This could be our chance." Clara sighed, turning back to the stove, as if she didn't want to acknowledge the truth of his words. "I know, Liam. I know." She placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of him, her gaze lingering on him for a moment before she added softly, "Just be careful, okay?" Liam nodded, forcing a smile. "I will, Ma. I promise." As Liam finished his breakfast, the weight of the decision started to feel real. Today wasn't just another day. It was the first day of something unknown. A chance that could either lift him and his family out of their struggles or pull him deeper into a world he wasn't ready for. But he couldn't go back now. He had made his choice. Daniel's arrival was like a whirlwind, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete as he stepped out of the same sleek, black limousine. His presence felt out of place in the quiet neighborhood, the shiny car parked awkwardly in front of the modest home. Liam stepped outside, his heart pounding in his chest. He had barely said goodbye to Clara, not knowing what to expect from this moment. He was still grappling with the confusion of what was happening. But now, there was no turning back. "Ready?" Daniel asked with a wide smile, his voice as smooth as the limousine's finish. Liam swallowed hard, nodding. "I think so." Daniel gestured toward the car. "Come on, let's go. Mr. Duncan is waiting." The ride was a blur of silence and tension. As the limousine slid smoothly down the street, Liam tried to take in the view. Everything was different. The pristine buildings, the wide, empty roads, the world outside the windows seemed so far removed from the crumbling streets of his neighborhood. He felt out of place, like an imposter in a world that wasn't meant for him. After what felt like an eternity, the car came to a stop outside a tall building. It was impressive, gleaming glass, towering over the city like a beacon of success. Liam swallowed, trying to mask his growing unease. He had never been inside a place like this, and the sight of it made his stomach twist. Daniel opened the door, stepping out and offering Liam his hand. "Come on, don't be nervous. You're here now." Liam hesitated for a moment, then took the man's hand, allowing himself to be led into the building. As they entered the lobby, Liam's eyes widened. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and the air smelled of expensive cologne and polished wood. Everything here was pristine, perfect. "Mr. Duncan is expecting you," Daniel said, leading Liam toward the elevators. The ride up was quick, the elevator rising smoothly through the building's upper floors. Liam's nerves were starting to get the better of him. The higher they went, the more surreal it felt. He tried to calm his racing heart, reminding himself that he had made this choice. This was his chance to prove himself. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and they stepped into a large, open office. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a breathtaking view of the city. And sitting behind the massive desk was Mr. Duncan, the man Liam had helped just a day ago. Mr. Duncan stood as they entered, his smile wide and welcoming. "Liam, I'm glad you could make it," he said, extending his hand. Liam felt a lump form in his throat as he shook Mr. Duncan's hand. He couldn't believe this was happening. He had never imagined anything like this. "Please sit down." Mr. Duncan gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Liam sat down, trying to steady his breathing. The room was too bright, too quiet, and he felt small in the face of all the luxury around him. Mr. Duncan's office was filled with rich mahogany furniture, a beautiful rug on the floor, and shelves of expensive-looking books and awards. "I wanted to offer you an opportunity," Mr. Duncan began, settling into his own chair behind the desk. "A chance to work with us, to learn from the ground up. I believe you've shown something rare, integrity, and in this world, that's something we value." Liam blinked, unsure how to respond. "I don't know what to say," he said softly, looking around the room. "I just helped you with some wood yesterday. I didn't think it was anything special." Mr. Duncan smiled again, his eyes warm. "It's not about the wood, Liam. It's about what you did. You saw someone in need and stepped in without hesitation. That's not something many people would do. You have potential, and I want to give you the chance to develop that." Liam felt his throat tighten. It was all happening so fast, and the weight of the decision was starting to settle on him. This wasn't just a job. It was the beginning of something far bigger than he had imagined. "So, what exactly would I be doing?" Liam asked, trying to focus on the details. Mr. Duncan leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "We run a business that requires hard work, dedication, and honesty. You'd start as an apprentice, helping with various tasks, sorting, deliveries, learning the ropes. But if you prove yourself, there's room to grow." Liam's mind raced. A chance to learn, to earn, and perhaps even change his life. But could he really do this? Could he really fit into this world? A world so different from everything he knew? "I'll think about it," Liam said finally, feeling the weight of the decision. But deep down, he knew that he had already made up his mind. There was no turning back now. Mr. Duncan nodded, as though he had expected this answer. "Take your time, Liam, but don't wait too long. The opportunity won't always be there." Liam stood up, shaking Mr. Duncan's hand once more. "Thank you. I'll be in touch." As he left the office, the reality of the situation hit him. He was about to embark on a new chapter, and the fear of the unknown was now tempered with a glimmer of hope. What lay ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Liam felt like he was on the verge of something greater. The next morning, as Liam sat at the small kitchen table, his mother, Clara, could see the worry etched across his face. His eyes, usually full of youthful energy, now looked tired, his mind consumed by the decision that had been weighing heavily on him since yesterday. Clara was busy preparing breakfast, the scent of freshly baked bread filling the room, but she couldn't help noticing the tension in the air. Sophie, oblivious to the seriousness of the moment, was happily coloring at the table, her small hands moving quickly as she worked on her picture. But Liam was lost in thought, his gaze distant. "What's on your mind, Liam?" Clara asked gently, her voice filled with concern as she slid a plate of scrambled eggs toward him. Liam looked up at her, startled out of his thoughts. He had spent the entire night thinking about what Mr. Duncan had said, the promise of a better future hanging over him like a shadow. But the truth was, he didn't know what to think anymore. His mother's warnings, her protective love, echoed in his mind, and yet the idea of a different life, one with possibilities beyond the struggle, kept drawing him in. I don't know, Ma," he said quietly, pushing the plate of eggs around with his fork. "I mean, it sounds like a good opportunity, but—" Clara didn't interrupt. She waited, letting him find the words. Liam finally sighed, putting the fork down. "But I don't know these people, Ma. What if it's not what it seems? What if I'm walking into something that's going to make everything worse?" Clara sat down next to him, her face filled with the kind of understanding only a mother could have. She reached out and placed a hand on his, her grip firm but gentle. "Liam, I know you want a better life. I see it in your eyes every day. But you have to be careful. The world can be harsh, and there are people out there who will take advantage of someone who's trying to make a change." Liam nodded, his thoughts clouded by doubt. "I know, Ma. But what if this is my only shot? What if this is the one chance to do something more than just delivering newspapers every day?" Clara sighed, her eyes softening. "I understand. But remember, We've always done things the hard way. It's not about taking the easiest route, Liam. It's about making sure you're not being used. Trust is earned, not given. I don't want you to get hurt. And I'm not sure we know enough about Mr. Duncan or his business to take that leap. Liam felt the weight of her words, the concern in her voice sinking deep into his chest. He knew she was only trying to protect him, to keep him safe in a world that hadn't been kind to them. But what if this was different? What if he didn't have to settle for the life they had? What if he could change their future? The questions swirled in his mind, and he found it hard to focus on the breakfast in front of him. He picked at his food, his mind already back at the office, back with Mr. Duncan, back with the promise of something better. I just don't know, Ma. I'm torn, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara gave him a soft, understanding smile. Whatever you decide, I trust you, Liam. Just don't rush into anything. Take your time and think it through. Liam sat there for a long moment, his thoughts swirling. He could feel the pull of both sides, the excitement of the opportunity, the doubt about trusting someone like Mr. Duncan, and the fear of losing everything they had worked so hard to hold on to. By the time the sun set that evening, Liam's mind was still a whirlpool of uncertainty. He couldn't concentrate on anything, his focus completely shattered by the decision ahead. He had promised himself he would talk to Clara about it, but he wasn't sure how much more he could say. She had made her feelings clear, and deep down, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that his own choice might tear them apart. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch and Clara was busy sewing in the corner of the living room, Liam couldn't sit still anymore. He had to talk to someone. He had to get the rest of his thoughts out of his head. Just before he turned in for the night, there was a knock at the door. Clara looked up, startled. It wasn't unusual for neighbors to stop by, but it was late, and visitors were rare. Liam stood up from the couch, his heart suddenly pounding. I'll get it, Ma, he said, already on his way to the door. When he opened it, his eyes went wide in surprise. There, standing on the other side, was Daniel, the man who had arrived in the limousine yesterday. His posture was just as composed as before, and there was no hint of hesitation in his demeanor. Liam, Daniel said with a polite smile, nodding his head slightly, Mr. Duncan asked me to come by and check on you. He wanted to make sure you had all the information you needed before making your decision. Liam's heart skipped a beat. This was unexpected. He hadn't anticipated Daniel's visit, and the timing felt odd. He glanced over his shoulder at Clara, who was now standing in the doorway, her expression wary and protective. I don't know if now's the right time, Liam began, glancing back at his mother. I'm still thinking about it. Daniel's smile didn't falter. Of course, I understand. But Mr. Duncan wanted to reassure you that this is a legitimate opportunity. He's been impressed by your work ethic, and he believes in giving people a chance, especially those who show integrity. He's not in the habit of offering something like this lightly. Liam felt the weight of the situation in the air. He looked at his mother, who gave him a cautious look. He could sense the tension in her, the fear that she was about to lose him to a world that didn't care about them. He knew she didn't trust Mr. Duncan, and the last thing he wanted was to betray that trust. I'll think about it, Daniel, Liam said firmly, trying to assert control over his own decision. But I still need some time. I want to be sure about this. Daniel nodded, a hint of understanding in his eyes. Of course, Liam. Take all the time you need. Mr. Duncan is a patient man. We're not going anywhere. Before Liam could say another word, Daniel turned and walked away, his polished shoes tapping lightly on the porch as he disappeared into the night. Liam closed the door slowly, his hands shaking. His mother didn't say anything at first, but the silence between them felt heavy, like something important had just shifted. I don't trust him, Clara finally said, her voice barely audible. I don't trust any of it. Liam nodded, his mind a tangled mess. The choice he had to make loomed over him, each passing moment amplifying the pressure. He had wanted a chance to change their lives, to do something more than the grind of his everyday existence. But the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like a dangerous gamble. Could he take the risk? Should he trust Mr. Duncan? Or was he just another person who would use him for his own benefit? I'm just trying to figure out what's right, Liam muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara sat down next to him, pulling him into a tight hug. Whatever you decide, I'll be here, Liam. But remember, you don't have to rush. Take your time. Liam closed his eyes, his thoughts still racing. Tomorrow, the decision would have to be made. But tonight, he wasn't sure where the path would lead. The next morning came far too quickly for Liam. He had barely slept, his mind still tangled with the worries and doubts that had clouded his thoughts since Daniel's visit. His mother's cautious words echoed in his mind. You don't have to rush, Liam. Think it through. But despite the uncertainty, there was something else, a sense of anticipation, a spark of hope. Today, he would step into a world completely different from the one he had known. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. Clara had been quiet over breakfast, her concern for Liam still obvious, but she hadn't said much about his decision. She simply handed him a plate of eggs, her fingers brushing his as she placed it in front of him, a silent sign of support. Liam picked at his food, not feeling very hungry, but he knew he had to eat. This day wasn't just about making a decision. It was about starting a journey that could change everything. The weight of the opportunity, and the responsibility that came with it, pressed down on him. By the time he left for work, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. The air was crisp and fresh, the world still quiet before the day truly began. He grabbed his jacket and walked outside, taking a deep breath. His heart raced as he spotted the black limousine parked just a few houses down. Daniel was already waiting by the door. "Morning, Liam," Daniel said, his smile as polished as always. "Ready for your first day?" Liam swallowed hard, trying to muster the courage. "Yeah, I think so." He didn't feel ready, not really, but there was no turning back now. This was happening. As he climbed into the back of the limousine, the same overwhelming sense of unfamiliarity washed over him. The car seemed to glide smoothly through the streets, taking him further and further away from everything he knew. He glanced out the window, watching the familiar sights of his neighborhood fade into the distance, replaced by clean, sleek buildings and busy streets. It was like stepping into another world, one that seemed so far removed from the dusty roads he was used to. The ride took them across the city to a building that was beyond anything Liam had ever seen. It was tall and impressive, the glass exterior reflecting the bright morning light. He stepped out of the car, his heart pounding in his chest. Daniel led him inside, and the doors opened to a world that seemed both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The lobby was enormous, with marble floors that gleamed under the bright lights. There were sleek elevators with polished metal panels and workers in suits walking briskly in every direction. "This is it," Daniel said, leading Liam through the lobby with ease. "Mr. Duncan runs a successful company here. You're going to start learning the ropes today." Liam could barely take it all in. It was nothing like the small offices he had imagined, nothing like the cramped quarters he was used to. This was a polished world of high-rise offices and professionals in sharp suits. Liam felt small, out of place, and for a moment, he wondered if he had made the right decision. They reached an elevator, and Daniel pressed the button for the top floor. The doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent. Liam's palms were sweating, and he wiped them on his jeans. The elevator ride seemed to take forever, and his mind raced with thoughts of doubt and second-guessing. When the doors finally opened, they stepped into a large office. The room was modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a panoramic view of the city. At the far end of the room, behind an enormous desk, sat Mr. Duncan. His presence was calm and assured, and as he looked up from a pile of papers, his smile was welcoming, but it carried an air of authority. "Liam, good to see you," Mr. Duncan said, standing up and walking around the desk to shake Liam's hand. "I'm glad you decided to join us." Liam shook his hand, feeling a little overwhelmed. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't quite believe he was standing in front of someone like Mr. Duncan, a man who had the power to change his life with a single decision. Mr. Duncan motioned toward a nearby chair. "Please, take a seat. Let's talk about what you'll be doing today." Liam sat down, trying to steady his breath. His nerves were getting the better of him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You'll be starting with some basic tasks today," Mr. Duncan explained. "There's a lot to learn, but don't worry. We'll ease you in. Today, You'll start by helping organize some paperwork and assisting with deliveries. There's no pressure. Just take your time and remember, you're here to learn, not just to work." Liam nodded, trying to process the words. He had expected something more complicated, but the simplicity of the tasks felt like a relief. At least, for now, he could ease into this new world without feeling too overwhelmed. For the rest of the day, Liam worked closely with one of the office employees, a man named Louis. Louis was in his mid-30s, with short brown hair and a laid-back attitude that made Liam feel a little more at ease. "Don't worry about getting everything perfect on your first day," Louis said as they sorted through a pile of documents. "Just focus on getting it done, and the rest will come with time. You'll be fine." Liam was grateful for Louis's calm demeanor. With every passing hour, he felt his confidence grow, even though the tasks were simple. He started to get the hang of organizing the papers, stacking them neatly into piles and labeling them according to the instructions Louis gave him. It wasn't difficult, but it was different from anything he had ever done before. For the first time, Liam began to feel the stirrings of something like hope, like maybe this was exactly what he needed. At lunchtime, Louis invited Liam to join him and some of the other employees in the break room. It was a small, comfortable area with a kitchenette and a few tables. Liam sat down with a sandwich and listened as the others talked about their work, the office gossip, and the latest projects they were working on. It was a casual environment, and for the first time since he had stepped into the building, Liam felt like he might belong here. By the end of the day, Liam was exhausted, his eyes tired from sorting through documents and answering phones, but there was a sense of accomplishment that had settled in his chest. The world outside had been intimidating, but here, in the office, it felt manageable. He had learned the basics, and he felt like he was beginning to understand how things worked. As he packed up his things and got ready to leave, Daniel appeared again, walking through the door with a smile. "How was your first day?" he asked. Liam smiled back, feeling a small burst of pride. "It was good. A lot to take in, but I think I can do this." Daniel nodded, his expression approving. "I knew you'd get the hang of it. You've got potential, Liam. Keep it up." Liam felt a flush of pride. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing something that mattered, something that could make a real difference for him and his family. As the day came to a close, Liam stepped out of the building, the cool evening air wrapping around him like a blanket. The city felt different now, less overwhelming and more like a place where he could carve out his future. He had taken the first step. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Liam was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could find his place in this world after all. The second week at Mr. Duncan's company felt like a whirlwind for Liam. Every morning, he woke up early, his stomach knotted with a mix of excitement and fear. The previous week had been a blur of simple tasks, sorting papers, making deliveries, learning the basics of office work. But now, things were starting to feel more real, more demanding. Mr. Duncan had given him more responsibility, and while Liam was eager to prove himself, the pressure of it all began to settle on his shoulders. It wasn't that Liam wasn't up to the challenge. He was. He had a strong work ethic, a willingness to learn, and a deep desire to do something more than the small world he had grown up in. But with the increase in responsibilities came an intensity that was difficult to handle. The weight of the work, combined with the constant pressure to keep up, made each day feel longer than the last. One particular morning, Liam found himself working on a project that required him to organize a large number of important documents. There were stacks of them on his desk, each pile more chaotic than the last. He had to cross-check everything carefully, but the more he looked at the paperwork, the more overwhelmed he became. The names blurred together, the figures seemed endless, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to make any progress. "Liam, can you handle the shipment details for me?" Louis's voice cut through the haze of Liam's frustration. "I need this done by the end of the day." Liam nodded, swallowing the frustration that was bubbling up inside him. "Sure, I've got it." But as he sat down to focus on the new task, his mind kept wandering back to the pile of paperwork he had been struggling with earlier. He felt the pressure building, the weight of his tasks becoming unbearable. It wasn't just the work, it was the fear that he would make a mistake, the fear that he would disappoint Mr. Duncan or anyone else who was counting on him. By midday, Liam was exhausted. His head throbbed with the effort of staying focused, and his hands ached from the constant motion of typing and sorting. He could feel the tension in his body, a tightness that hadn't been there before. He needed a break, but there was no time. The work had to be done. During lunch, he sat alone in the break room, trying to eat but finding that he couldn't stomach much. He picked at his sandwich, his mind racing with thoughts of the next task he had to complete. Lewis walked in and noticed Liam sitting at the table, looking worn out. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, sitting across from him. Liam nodded, though the gesture felt half-hearted. "Yeah, just a lot to do." Lewis leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're doing great, Liam. I can see how hard you're working. But don't burn yourself out. You've got to pace yourself." Liam sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know. It's just, everything is piling up. I'm afraid I'll mess something up, and then what?" Lewis chuckled softly. "Trust me, we've all been there. You think things are bad now, just wait until you're handling the really big stuff." He paused, giving Liam a pointed look. "But you've got something most people don't, a real drive. You'll figure it out. Just don't let the pressure get to you." It's easy to forget that we're not expected to get everything right on the first try. Liam forced a smile, grateful for the encouragement. "Thanks, Lewis. I'll try to keep that in mind." But as the rest of the day wore on, the pressure only seemed to grow. The tasks kept coming, one after another, and by the time the workday ended, Liam felt like he had barely made a dent in his pile of assignments. He packed up his things, his exhaustion visible in the way he moved, and made his way home. When he arrived, Clara was there, waiting for him. She could tell something was off as soon as she saw the look on his face. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Liam dropped his bag onto the couch and slumped down beside it. "Yeah, I just don't know if I'm cut out for this, Ma." Clara sat next to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Liam, you've been working so hard. Don't be so hard on yourself. It takes time. You've only just started. But if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to take a step back." Liam shook his head. "It's not just that. It's everything. I don't know if I can keep up. Every time I make progress, there's more to do, and I just can't catch up." Clara was silent for a moment, her hand still resting on his shoulder. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Liam, you don't have to do it all on your own. Remember, you're not just doing this for you. You're doing it for us. But you're not alone in this. If you ever feel like you're drowning, it's okay to ask for help." Liam nodded, but the weight of his thoughts didn't lift. He knew his mother was right. He wasn't alone. But in that moment, it felt like he was carrying the world on his shoulders. The following days only seemed to add to the pressure. Each new task was more difficult than the last, and the sense of competition in the office seemed to be growing stronger. Liam couldn't help but notice the way the other employees, Lewis especially, moved with ease, handling the workload with calm efficiency. They were seasoned professionals, and here he was, struggling to keep up. One afternoon, Mr. Duncan stopped by Liam's desk to check in on his progress. Liam straightened up nervously, wiping his hands on his pants. The older man gave him a once-over, then nodded approvingly. "You're doing well, Liam. I see potential in you. Keep pushing yourself, and you'll be one of the top workers here." Liam smiled weakly, but the compliment didn't quite ease the weight in his chest. He wanted to believe that he had the potential Mr. Duncan spoke of, but the pressure to live up to those expectations felt overwhelming. Every day felt like a test he wasn't sure he was passing. Later that afternoon, as Liam was sorting through another stack of paperwork, he overheard a conversation between two employees. One of them, an older man named Tom, was speaking to Lewis in a low voice. "You know, the kid's good, but I don't think he's got what it takes to keep up with the real work," Tom said, his tone dismissive. "He's not cut out for this kind of pressure. We'll see how long he lasts." Liam froze, his heart sinking at the words. He tried to push them out of his mind, but they lingered in his thoughts for the rest of the day, casting a shadow over everything he did. The doubt that had been creeping in for days now felt like it was taking root, and he wondered if maybe they were right. If maybe he wasn't cut out for this after all. That night, as Liam lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of his doubts pressed harder than ever before. He had worked so hard for this opportunity, but the fear of failing was becoming unbearable. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he wasn't meant to be in this world? He turned over, pulling the blanket up tighter around his shoulders, trying to push the thoughts out of his head. But deep down, he knew he had a decision to make. Keep fighting or walk away. And he wasn't sure which path would be easier. Liam woke up the next morning feeling a deep weight in his chest. The thoughts from the previous night, Tom's words, the pressure of the work, the constant worry that he wasn't cut out for this, still lingered. He lay in bed for a few minutes longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, feeling as though he was standing at the edge of something vast and uncertain. The world outside was still dark, and the house was quiet except for the soft sounds of Clara moving around in the kitchen. Liam had always admired how his mother could manage so much with so little. She didn't complain, she just worked, and she did it with a quiet determination that he knew he had inherited. But today, even that inner strength seemed a little harder to access. He dragged himself out of bed and got dressed, mechanically going through the motions of his morning routine. His stomach churned with anxiety, and for a brief moment, he considered staying home. It would be easier. But that wasn't who he was. He wasn't going to back down. Not now, not after everything he had worked for. When he stepped into the kitchen, Clara looked up from the stove. She must have noticed the tension in his face because she asked gently, "Rough night?" Liam hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, it's just the work, Ma. It's a lot. I don't know if I can keep up." Clara placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "I know it's hard, Liam, but you're tougher than you think. You've got a good heart, and you don't give up. That's more than half the battle." Liam forced a smile, trying to hide the doubt that lingered inside. "Thanks, Ma," he said quietly. The ride to the office was uneventful, but the closer they got, the more Liam's nerves began to take hold. He kept replaying Tom's words in his mind, imagining what would happen if he really wasn't good enough. Would Mr. Duncan be disappointed? Would he send Liam packing, telling him he wasn't fit for the job? When the black limousine pulled up in front of the building, Liam took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He stepped out of the car, but this time, his steps felt heavier, more deliberate. He wasn't sure what was waiting for him, but he knew one thing. He couldn't keep running from the fear. The first few hours of the day were the same as always, sorting papers, organizing files, and assisting with deliveries. But today, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His mind kept drifting to the tasks he had left unfinished, the mistakes he had made over the past week, and the fear that had settled in his stomach. He was about to take a break when Mr. Duncan approached him. His presence was commanding, but there was a softness in his gaze that made Liam feel like he was being seen, not just as another employee, but as someone capable of more. "Liam, how are you feeling?" Mr. Duncan asked, his tone genuine. Liam hesitated, unsure of how to answer. He wanted to say everything was fine, that he had it under control, but the truth was, he felt like he was barely holding it together. "I'm okay. Just a little overwhelmed, I guess." Mr. Duncan nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. This kind of work isn't easy. It takes time to adjust, and even longer to truly master. But I've been watching you, and I see something in you. You've got drive, Liam. That's something not everyone has." Liam's throat tightened. The words felt good, too good, almost. He wanted to believe them, to let them wash over him and make him feel better, but the doubt still lingered. "You know," Mr. Duncan continued, "it's easy to get lost in the details, but remember why you're here. You've got the chance to do something bigger than yourself. Don't let the fear get in the way of your potential." The words struck something deep within Liam. He thought about his family, his mother, Sophie, and all the dreams he had of a better life. What if he was letting the fear of failure hold him back from something greater? What if he was capable of more than he gave himself credit for? After their conversation, Liam felt a shift inside him. It wasn't immediate. He still had moments of doubt, moments when the pressure felt like it would swallow him whole. But something had changed. He wasn't ready to give up just yet. The rest of the day went by quickly. He found himself tackling tasks with a renewed focus, determined not to let the mistakes of the past week define him. When he made an error in a report, instead of getting frustrated, he corrected it and moved forward. When he struggled with a new software program, he asked Lewis for help, pushing through the discomfort of not knowing everything. By the time the workday came to a close, Liam was exhausted, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a small flicker of pride in his chest. He hadn't conquered the mountain yet, but he had taken a step toward it, and that was enough for today. As he walked out of the building, Liam's thoughts were quieter than they had been in days. He hadn't solved all his problems, and the fear wasn't gone, but he was beginning to understand that it didn't have to be. The pressure wasn't going to disappear overnight, and the doubts would always be there, lurking in the background. But that didn't mean he had to let them control him. When he stepped into the limousine for the ride home, he found himself feeling something he hadn't in a long time: hope. Not the kind that was born from blind optimism, but the kind that came from hard work and determination. He wasn't there yet, but he was closer than he had been before. At home, Clara was waiting for him, the familiar warmth of the kitchen filling the air. "How was your day?" she asked, looking up from the stove. Liam smiled, the weight of the day finally beginning to lift. "Better," he said simply. "A lot better." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Better? That's all?" Liam nodded. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to get the hang of it." Clara smiled warmly, walking over to him and pulling him into a hug. "I'm proud of you, Liam. You've got this. Just remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going." Liam smiled, the knot in his chest loosening for the first time in what felt like forever. For the first time, he truly believed it. He didn't have to be perfect. He just had to keep going. The next morning, Liam woke up with a sense of determination he hadn't felt in a while. The doubts that had once clung to him like a shadow were still there, lurking in the background, but today, they felt less powerful. Yesterday had been a turning point. He had finally started to feel like he belonged at the company, like he was capable of handling the work. And it wasn't just the small tasks anymore. He was starting to take on more responsibility, learning what it took to run the business, and he felt proud of what he had accomplished. But even as his confidence grew, something else simmered beneath the surface, something that had been building over the past few weeks. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about the company. He had been working long hours, learning the ropes, and had seen enough to know that the world behind Mr. Duncan's business wasn't as pristine as it appeared. Small things didn't add up. The way certain documents were handled, the offhand comments he overheard from some of the other employees. There was an undercurrent of secrecy, and Liam couldn't ignore it any longer. That day, as Liam was sorting through yet another stack of files, he stumbled upon a document that made his stomach churn. It was a report detailing an offshore account, one that had been set up under a false name. The figures didn't make sense. There were transactions hidden between other legitimate payments, money flowing through accounts in a way that looked far too deliberate. As Liam read through the report, the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. Mr. Duncan, the man who had seemed so kind and generous, was involved in something far more sinister than Liam could have imagined. Liam's pulse quickened as he realized the gravity of what he had uncovered. This wasn't just a small mistake or a miscommunication. It was corruption. The kind of corruption that could destroy lives. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about the way people had been taken advantage of, the way Mr. Duncan had built his wealth on the backs of people like Liam, people who were too desperate for a chance to see what was really going on. His mind raced. What should he do? He couldn't just ignore it. But what if exposing this meant losing everything? His job, his chance to provide for his family, the stability that he had worked so hard for. But Liam knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't be part of something that wasn't right. That afternoon, when Mr. Duncan called Liam into his office, the tension in the air was almost suffocating. Mr. Duncan sat behind his desk, his eyes focused and calculating. "Liam," Mr. Duncan began, his voice calm but firm, "I've been keeping an eye on your work, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You've come a long way in a short time. You're proving yourself to be a valuable asset to the company." Liam stood in front of the desk, his mind a swirl of thoughts. He could feel the weight of the document hidden in his bag, the knowledge of what he had discovered pressing on him like an anchor. "Thank you," Liam said, his voice steady, though inside, he was anything but calm. "But, Mr. Duncan, I found something." Something I think you need to know about. Mr. Duncan's expression didn't change. What is it, Liam? Liam hesitated, unsure how to approach this. He had been taught to respect authority, to keep his head down and do his job. But this wasn't just about following orders anymore. It was about doing what was right. I found some paperwork, Liam began, his voice growing more confident as he spoke. Documents that show transactions that don't seem right. I don't know what they are exactly, but they look like they're being hidden on purpose. Mr. Duncan's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Liam took a deep breath and continued. I think something's wrong, Mr. Duncan. I think you're involved in something that could hurt a lot of people, and I can't be part of it anymore. I have to speak up. For the first time, Mr. Duncan's calm demeanor faltered. He leaned back in his chair, a cold smile curling at the corners of his lips. You think you understand what's going on here, Liam? Mr. Duncan's voice dropped to a dangerous level. You think you can just walk in here and expose everything? Do you really believe you have the power to take down what I've built? Liam stood tall, despite the fear creeping up his spine. I'm not trying to take it down. I just want the truth to come out. People need to know what's happening, and they deserve to be treated fairly. Mr. Duncan's smile disappeared. He stood up from his chair, his gaze never leaving Liam. You're naive, Liam. You think the world works the way you want it to. It doesn't. You think exposing me will make things better for you? For your family? You'll lose everything you've worked for. Liam didn't flinch. Maybe, but I won't be part of a system that hurts people just to make money. I can't live with that. For a moment, there was silence between them, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Mr. Duncan studied Liam, as though weighing his options, deciding what to do with him. Then, to Liam's surprise, Mr. Duncan sat back down and folded his arms across his chest. You have guts, I'll give you that. But you don't know what you're dealing with. Liam didn't back down. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, and I'm not afraid of you anymore. Mr. Duncan's eyes flashed with something like irritation, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced down at the stack of papers on his desk, his fingers tapping against the surface. Finally, he looked back at Liam, his expression unreadable. I'll give you a choice, Liam. You can walk out of here right now, pretend this never happened, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. Or, you can expose me and walk away with nothing. Your career, your future, it'll all be gone. Liam felt his heart race in his chest. This was the moment. There was no turning back. He knew what he had to do. I'm leaving, Liam said firmly. I won't be part of this anymore. Mr. Duncan didn't try to stop him. Instead, he simply nodded, his face hardening. You've made your choice. Just remember, you can't fight something this big. And when it all falls apart, don't come crying to me. Liam turned and walked out of the office, his mind racing, but his heart clear. As he stepped out of the building, he felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't the decision he wanted to make, but it was the right one. Liam didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know how things would unfold, or what the consequences of his actions would be. But he did know one thing for certain. He had chosen the path of integrity, and in doing so, he had found a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. The road ahead was uncertain, but Liam was ready to face it, one step at a time. And whatever came his way, he knew he had the strength to keep moving forward.